The invention of the car isn't about one person. It's about many people, all adding things, trying things, improving on things. And the first car ever made wasn't the one that started production. It was just a prototype. But the story of how the first was made is incredible. The first person to actually make a working model of a car was Nicholas Joseph Cugnot. And to be fair, it didn't really work. He made it for the French army to pull artillery, but it was too slow and unreliable. But at least it was the first. Fast forward to the 1860s, and you have two German inventors, Wilhelm Maybach and Gottlieb Daimler, who finally cracked the engine part, inventing the first high-speed internal combustion engine powered by gas. This was a key part of making the first car. Then there was another inventor, Siegfried Marcus, who created a gasoline-powered two-stroke combustion engine that he attached to a cart. This was an important step in the right direction. Up to this point, a few others had made prototypes of a car, but they were just prototypes, they didn't turn into anything. Which brings us to Karl Benz. Benz was the really important one. Because in 1885, Benz created the first practical car. And then the next year, he started a company and began making the first commercial cars. So what led him to make the first real car? Well, Benz's father was a locomotive driver, so he was obsessed with engines from a young age. He studied mechanical engineering and started a small machine shop in Mannheim, Germany. A few years later, Benz's wife inherited some money, which she gave to her husband, and he used the cash to finance the creation of his first car. One of the first orders he got was to make a two-stroke gas engine. Finally, Benz's hard work paid off. He hit upon this idea of a three-wheeled cart powered by one of his engines. Benz said he had solved the complicated problem of a self-propelling vehicle. It had a chassis, a steering system, a transmission, and a clutch, the main parts of every car that exists today. So you could say Benz's invention was the birth of the automotive industry, and arguably one of the most important inventions of all time, as it changed society forever. But back to Benz. He decided to patent his invention, the first car, in January 1886. He called it the vehicle powered by a gas engine. However, his wife, Bertha, is just as important a part of this invention, probably even more important, because without her, they might never have come up with the car at all. Bertha reportedly told her husband to quit his job and work on his invention full-time. She was the one who suggested that Benz use the money she'd inherited to finance the project. And then, after the invention was complete, Bertha was the one who went on a 66-mile journey all by herself in the vehicle to prove to people that it worked. She did this without telling her husband, who'd only ever driven it in their yard. Bertha wrote later on, "I made up my mind to support my husband and put all my energy into the success of the invention." She would test drive the vehicle every day to see what problems there were and how to fix them. This test drive also led to the fact that Benz designed the world's first car brake. Because after Bertha nearly collided with a wall, she said her husband needed to put some brake pads on the wooden wheels. She basically carried the invention forward, and without her, Benz might never have created the car as we know it. Benz actually hired a man to drive the car for Bertha. As other drivers were laughing at him, they couldn't believe this was the future of transport. But then Bertha Benz said, "I knew the car was okay in corners and on flat roads, but I couldn't tell if it would also work on slopes." So they found the third person to create the car. She pushed her husband's invention to its limits. They had to stop in a village along the way, where some boys were running after them trying to chase the car down, as they thought this contraption moving on its own was a horse without a rider. Bertha stopped in a pharmacy and bought some Ligroin, a solvent used to clean sewing machines, which they also used in the car to repel rust. This was basically the first ever petrol station. Then, when the drive started again, the gentleman they'd hired as a driver quit after realizing how steep the hills were. So Bertha was left to do it all alone, sometimes pushing the car herself up the hills. They had to stop at a blacksmith to have the wooden brake pads strengthened, as the hills were causing serious problems. And they had to stop at a cobbler, as a leather strap holding the gears together had broken. This was like the first ever car garage. They arrived at Bertha's mother's house for the night, and then started the journey back the following day. From this trip, both Karl and Bertha wrote down what they learned to do the next version of the car better. And they weren't just the first people to make a car, they were also the first to test the market. Bertha realized it wasn't powerful enough, so Karl then designed a more powerful model with 4 wheels and patented it. Right after that, he started his company Benz and CA and began to build more and more of his cars and sell them. This is when you could say the invention of the car really happened. The problem was, Benz's invention was really only popular in Germany, as boosted local patriotism kept the German-made cars at home. But Benz's competitor, Daimler, had connections with the US, so people say he was actually the real first person to invent the car if you define it on who made it popular on a global scale. Interestingly, it wasn't until after Benz died that things really took off. In 1926, Benz's widow sold his company to Daimler, and they merged, creating the company we know today as Mercedes-Benz. So, while they didn't make the global impact at the time, Karl and Bertha Benz can unequivocally be said to have created the first car, just under a century later than the unsuccessful first efforts. What do you think? Was it Daimler or Benz who created the first car? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to hit the like button if you found this story interesting, as it helps out the channel a lot.